Many of you will probably remember the shocking story in 2017 when a gunman entered the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, and opened fire. 26 people lost their lives that day, and another 20 were injured. However, a nearby neighbor, who later became known as the good guy with a gun, grabbed his gun and ran from his house toward the church, shooting the killer. That guy is our guest today. Stephen Willeford, thanks for joining me from Texas.
Thank you very much for having me.
Stephen, can you just describe in your own words what exactly happened that day?
Well, I was home relaxing, and I didn't go to church that morning because the next day I was going to start my on-call at the hospital, where I'd have to carry a pager and I could be called in at any time of the night or day and go take care of emergencies. And so I was trying to relax, and my daughter informed me that there was shooting going on. And when I realized it was shooting, it was gunfire, I ran to my safe and I got out my rifle, an AR-15, and grabbed some ammunition and started sticking it into a magazine. And my daughter came in and she said, "Dad, there's someone in black tactical gear shooting up the church." She had run outside, got in her car, and drove up the block and saw him entering into the church shooting through the doors. And I asked her, "Did you call 911?" And she said, "I did. They're aware of it." And it scared me more at that moment that the police were coming, because they were coming to a mass shooting, and I'm running over with a rifle in my hands. They're going to think I'm the shooter. But my community couldn't wait for the police to come.
Now, were you scared for your own life as this was all unfolding?
Yeah, no, I wasn't scared at all. I was just terrified.
Yeah, I can
Uh,
imagine.
I,
Did you think
you
about
know,
turning back and just maybe leaving it for the police to deal with?
no, no. I knew too many people and cared too deeply for the people that were there, and I knew they needed help. It was innocents in there, and nobody could defend themselves. And so someone had to be there to stop it.
Did you have any training in firearms or law enforcement to prepare you for what happened?
I, I didn't have any police department or any military in my past, but I was a competitive shooter, pistol competitive, and some rifle competition and stuff, and just a gun enthusiast, and I shoot all the time. It's like golfing for me. It's my hobby. It's my release. So I did do some training with a police officer that was on my shooting team, and he was a former Army Ranger, and he was a San Antonio police officer, and we trained together so we could compete together, make our team better.
You know, and church shootings are in the news once again with a recent case in December of a man shooting and killing two parishioners at a Texas church before being gunned down by another church member who was packing. What are your thoughts on the actions of Jack Wilson and the response of the church security team?
I think that Jack Wilson is an excellent example of what has to happen. Jack and his team came together a month after Sutherland Springs. They saw what happened in Sutherland Springs and they started training together. And armed civilians, these shootings stop, killing stops when a second gun shows up to the scene. And it takes someone else to stop it, whether it's a police officer, whether it's somebody like Jack that's on the scene. And the police were 5 to 7 minutes behind me, and my community didn't have 5 to 7 minutes to wait. And Jack, he solved the issue in less than 6 seconds. They started training a month after Sutherland Springs, and Jack told me himself, I've had the opportunity to meet him, and he told me himself, they set up their team direct response to what happened in Sutherland Springs.
It's interesting that your case of intervening with a firearm spurred a brand new Texas law that took effect in September that made it legal for people to have guns in churches. Who would have ever thought we'd reach that point? Now, this change likely saved many lives, but it raises the question, should all churches have armed security teams? What do you think?
Absolutely. Every church. Every church should have an armed security team. And they should train together, and who better to protect the people that you care about than you? Be responsible, know what you're doing. The police aren't any better than most of us guys that shoot for fun. Uh, and you can't have a police officer everywhere. Too many times, and we have some of the best police officers in the world here in Wilson County, but they couldn't be there. And so too many times the police are there to mop up the blood, take evidence, and hopefully arrest someone. Usually the shooting is done before the police ever get on the scene. And again, I have the most respect for the police department you can't even imagine, because they put their lives on the line every day.
So, Stephen, how many churches in your own community made security changes since the deadly shootings in 2017?
We only have like 3 churches. Sutherland Springs is a town of 600 people. But I'm going to tell you, since then, I have flown around the United States, and I've flown all different states, and I talk to churches and I help them set up safety response teams and teach them how to be more prepared and more ready for what might happen. So that it affects everywhere, and it's got far-reaching implications. A lot of places are doing it now.
So how does this really affect church members when they see armed security, Stephen? Does it tend to make people more uncomfortable or maybe a little more secure while they're worshiping?
Grandma's sitting up there on the 3rd row. She passes by us and she sees us carrying guns. And I've had plenty of people tell me before that they feel much more safe now that we're watching over. We're the sheepdog. We're watching the sheep. And it gives them the opportunity to worship without fear. And our attitude is, if anyone dies here today, let it be one of us and nobody that's innocent.
It's kind of sad if you think about it, that we do live in a society that needs security and guns for places of worship. Any thoughts on why we see so much violence today?
I've got the perfect solution for the violence. And what it is we have taken God out of our schools, and we've taken God out, and we turn around and we devalue life, even unborn innocent children. And abortion runs rampant. Over 61 million children have been aborted since abortion came legal in the United States. And now we have states that are saying assisted suicide is okay. You've taken the value of life at the most innocent and at the most vulnerable ends. And why should anybody value life anymore when you do things like that? You can walk away from God. God will allow you to walk away. But you get the consequences of that. He didn't cause this. But if we walk away from him, then his protections and stuff are look in the Bible. When they walk away, when God's people walk away from him, then the nation was given over to their enemies.
Yeah, it's true. We walk away from God, he doesn't walk away from us. Stephen, should we have better background checks in place to keep guns out of the hands of those with criminal records or maybe people with mental health issues?
We already have background checks. The guy that, and I don't use his name, the guy that shot up Sutherland Springs, he had a felony conviction for killing his son's dog and then fracturing his infant son's skull. He had 2 felony convictions. He spent time in a mental institution where he escaped, and then the Air Force discharged him with a dishonorable discharge. and then the Air Force didn't enter any of it into the NICS system, which is a National Instant Background Check. They didn't enter any of that into the system. It's the very government that does the background checks that failed to do its job.
What are your thoughts on protecting students, whether they be in universities, colleges, or maybe even high schools or elementary schools? Should teachers be carrying guns, or maybe each school have
Absolutely.
armed security personnel?
Absolutely, on both cases have armed security, and I'm not saying make it mandatory for teachers to carry, but if a teacher, I used to shoot competition against a team, 3 out of the 5 men were teachers, and they were really good shots and they were really good with their guns. Those men would be great defending their schools. And I believe they absolutely should. And you know, you can bar a door, and you can tell the kids, if anybody comes through that door, throw books, throw whatever they can at them, and then the teacher has a clear shot. Him or her, they're not dodging books. You know, if a shooter comes into that room, have the kids throw books at them, and then the teacher step up there and take the shooter out.
So how do you respond to people who say that stricter gun laws would prevent mass shootings from taking place? I mean, here in Canada, we have many politicians who believe banning handguns altogether will make our cities and towns safer.
Okay, look, I don't live by the border of Canada and the United States, but I do Mexico and the United States. And Mexico has way stricter laws than Canada does, and the drug cartels rule. And not long ago, the drug cartels met the Mexican army, and they demanded the release of El Chapo's son. And they outgunned the Mexican army and drove him back, and the Mexican army released El Chapo's son. That's what happens with gun control. When you take guns out of innocent, law-abiding citizens, then the only ones that have them are the criminals. And I talked to Sheriff Louderback, which is down here on the border, and he is part of the border security and Trump's team of everything border security. And Sheriff Louderback said the drug cartels across the border have a $500 billion budget. Now let that soak in for a minute. And let's just say that you do ban guns from the black market. With $500 billion, they could take $1 billion of that and make their own manufacturing plant, manufacture their own guns. They don't need laws. It doesn't make any difference. They can supply as many guns as they want to themselves, and it doesn't matter.
So Stephen, let me ask you something. When did you first pick up a gun and shoot a gun? How old were you?
I was probably 5 years old. I was raised on a dairy.
Wow.
And my father taught me how to shoot a .22 and to I shot metal cans back then. It wasn't aluminum. And I shot cans and stuff until I got good at it. And then I carried a gun with me whenever I would work the cattle or whatever to take care of predators that were living off of our livestock and stuff. The coyotes that were coming in for the chickens or whatever. And I hunted rabbits for food and deer. And I learned to shoot at 5 years old, and I really loved shooting. And so when I became an adult, I became an instructor, and I started doing a youth shooting league where all 3 of my children were NRA distinguished experts with a pistol by the time they were 8 years old.
Stephen Willeford, the good guy with a gun. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Sutherland Springs, Texas.
Thank you very much.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.